everybody. We're back with Jason Lauritsen, and he's in around Omaha, Nebraska. I happen to be in Augusta, Georgia. And we're chatting with each other about what we do for a living and as it relates to employee engagement, leadership development, and things like that. Jason, I want to just touch base with you about some of the things that I've read. Just tell me what you think when you use the term empowering your managers. Where are you going with that?
So, for me, the way that I think about my work is I realized that, there's a lot of people that do different things. Like, coaches do certain things and trainers do certain things, and everybody's kind of got their way of tackling this. What I have come to believe is that in order to create sustainable, meaningful behavior change, that has to start with mindset. It has to start with sort of our beliefs. And I think a lot of times we skip past that. And so where most of my work is oriented, and I've realized like this is what my gift is challenging mindset and helping people think differently and think better about what they do and how they do it, especially in the context of obviously workplace engagement and how we interact with each other in the workplace. And so for me, empowering managers is really about giving them a better framework, I guess, with which to think about the work they do, helping them understand it more clearly and in a way that's more helpful to them so that they're not, I think being a middle manager in corporate America is the hardest job on the planet. I mean, it is, and it's oftentimes not very rewarding. Like you're getting pulled at from everywhere. You're supposed to be doing a full-time job, individual contributor job on top of managing people, and you're trained in a model of management that's completely out of date, right? It's based on this sort of old school work as a contract. My job as a manager is to essentially coerce you into better performance and make sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And so when I think about empowering, it's like if I can teach that manager to understand that for that employee, that work is a relationship, just like any other major relationship in terms of the employee wouldn't say it that way necessarily, but that's how they experience it.
Yes.
As a manager, if I understand that, and then I can start putting everything through the filter of like, okay, I need to sit down and have a coaching conversation with you. How can I do that in the context of building that relationship and making the employee feel cared for and trusted and valued? If I can get that in my head, everything else after that is likely to work better. At least I'm likely not to do as much damage, I think.
Let me ask you this. When you go into an organization and you're just getting to know them, and more than likely you're contracted by the heads of organizations or fairly high executives in charge of departments and such?
Yeah, it depends. It depends. Sometimes it's through HR, sometimes it's through leadership. It just depends on the certain particular organization.
How much insight, in your experience, how much insight do those people themselves see that they have to start doing something different? When you come in and say, we want to empower our managers and you're one of them, how do they receive what you intend to share with that organization as far as leadership? Because they are extremely important to changing things.
That's a great question. What I would say is that most of the organizations that I work with, or that tap me to come in to be any part of, like whether it's training or whatever that is, I would say most of the time, if you're bringing me in, it's because you have leaders who at least think they get it.
Right.
And so generally they have, they're more, they care about people. They know that they need to make some changes. They're sort of open and receptive to the messaging. Typically they think, generally, I would say it's that they think they're farther along than they probably are, So when you actually get into it and you start introducing some of these ideas, they're like, oh, most of the time, like some light bulbs come on. I wouldn't say it's always the case, and I do think they're still challenged. Like to that, quite one of the things I love to do, and I don't do it as much now as I used to, is I always loved doing the executive readout on employee survey data to the executive teams and organizations. And I would get to do this periodically at Quantum. And then I was doing that prior in my HR career, but I loved that. And I always enjoyed like the tension that you knew these executives were coming in sort of with the belief that it was someone else who was the problem, right? That it was the managers or the employees or somebody wasn't getting it. And inevitably, a big part of the message is that you have to, like, this all starts with you. And, getting them to not become defensive, getting them to understand their role in it, getting them to wake up to that is really important. So yeah, I would say that I think there's still a big blind spot there in most organizations, but the organizations I work with the leaders tend to be at least sort of leaning strongly in the right direction. So it's more so like, hey, we need guidance as opposed to come in and unstick us.
Right. Great answer. Great response. Hey, I meant to start with this question because I had a little snicker when I saw somewhere that you called yourself a reformed corporate guy.
Yeah.
And lived in the belly of the beast as a corporate HR leader. And, we both have left that road and we've moved on to working for ourselves and helping organizations, maybe even having wider influence than we ever did. So tell me about being in the belly of the beast. What were some of the hardest things that maybe even insurmountable things that you just couldn't get
past?
You couldn't get what you needed going because of just the inertia of the organizations you were in.
Yeah. Boy, that's a great question. There's a long list.
Yeah.
I think, so for me, it's like early on, I started noticing, like, organizations are, especially corporate organizations are so, and I'm sure you had the same experience. It's almost like they're inefficient by design. And there's so much time spent on things that don't really add value, or that, I joke all the time about the fact that, it's not a joke, I guess. I say it as a joke to corporate people because they will laugh, but it's sort of like a painful thing for them too, is that, part of the reason I love I'm like, when I did this, like, it decreased the amount of time I spent on two key activities that I really dislike. One is meetings, and the second is commuting. And so I don't spend time, my amount of time I spend in meetings I don't want to be a part of, where I'm not adding value. Like, it decreased by like 98% when I left corporate.
Yes.
And, and the same thing with like commuting. I don't get in my car unless I actually need to physically be there. I can do my work wherever I do my work, and where it makes sense. So like that part of it, the biggest thing I would say that for me was a struggle was just the unnecessary politics and power games that go on, and just the lack of authenticity and honesty and transparency and openness around how we manage the business. I have a story that I tell occasionally that I'm curious if you've had this experience, but it's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. I was the head of HR for a regional bank, and my boss was the CEO. And there was this idea my team and I had been working on for and this is years ago, but sure, we wanted to put like this kind of service into our benefits plan. It was essentially designed to create greater transparency, like on like pricing, to empower our employees to make better decisions based on pricing, because we were on a consumer-driven health plan. So sure, it was kind of if you were doing an elective surgery, you'd have to, you'd engage with this group. They'd go get your pricing information, bring it back to you so you could make an informed decision. And it was one of those things where, like, this will impact employees. It's good for employees. It's good for the plan. It's good for the bank. It's good for all these things. And so I had taken it to my boss, and she had said, she was listening, and then she had a concern because one of our largest clients was one of the local health systems, big hospital. And I said, well, I think we can manage this because we can work with them. We can create pricing that creates steerage. They probably actually end up getting a bigger percentage of our, like it was a whole thing.
Sure.
So I was trying to convince her that we could do this, manage it. And she's like, you know what, let's do this. Let's schedule a meeting, get together all the different account managers that work with that client, and we'll talk about it, make a decision, together. So I'm like, all right. So I scheduled this meeting, invited everybody. She had told me, like when we scheduled it, she's like, I'm going to be a little bit late, but go ahead and get started. And so I scheduled this meeting. I get in, everybody comes in, and there's like 6 people around the table, I think, plus me, or 5. And I'm explaining this to them. I'm explaining the benefits. I'm explaining how I thought we could probably manage this really effectively with the client. And, we're like 10, 15 minutes into this meeting. Everybody's nodding and they're like, man, that's a really good idea. And yep, I think we can do this. So my boss walks in, like I said, 15 minutes late. She walks in kind of quietly. She comes up, sits down at the table, and the conversation's continuing. And she sat there long enough to get a sense of kind of where the group was trending. And then finally, when there was a break in the action, she's just like, well, she's like, I just am really uncomfortable with how this could potentially impact our relationship with the hospital. And that is all she said. Mm-hmm. And like instantly, it was as if everyone had like a lobotomy or some kind of magical thing. Everybody in the room's like, yeah, no, we probably shouldn't do this. Probably a little too risky. It was the most amazing thing. 5 minutes later, we're done. She's like, maybe we can revisit this next year, but we're going to hold off on it for this year. And it was over.
And you said, thank you very much.
Like it's like living in a world like that.
Yes.
Just doesn't work for me. Like I get angry, frustrated. And so I started I become non-helpful at that point. But I love that story because I think everybody's sat through something like that over and over, most times in most companies, there's something like that. And I'm sure you probably have a list of experiences like that. And it's just, at some point, it just breaks you down.
Yeah. And that your time's better spent actually with other organizations that are open to new things and new things to help them. So
go where you can make an impact.
Right. I love that you talked about living in beta. We have to be comfortable living in beta, and I want to hear a little bit more about that. And that was from the link you put up from. It was your mind. It was like building your mind, that you're always in progress. You're always a work in progress. And you said something like living in beta.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that I am most afraid of is becoming like I resisted for a long time even using the term expert or attaching that word to me, because in my mind, I'm a believer in, and I try to practice this idea from I think it's a Buddhist concept initially, but this idea of beginner's mind, where, in a beginner's mind, the possibilities are endless, because you don't have any preconceived notions. But in the expert's mind, possibilities are few, because the expert comes to believe that there's one best way. And so I'm always concerned about that in sort of all aspects of my life, becoming dogmatic, becoming overly convinced of anything. And so I think we need to be constantly evolving. And I know I'm constantly evolving. And one of the ways that I talk to my kids about this all the time, especially my 22-year-old, just because he's at that stage where I'm like, listen, one of my best skills is I at least historically, I'm doing less of this now, but I make really big mistakes. And but I try to learn from it and grow and develop and evolve and whatever, so that if you hit me, you talk to me today and you talk to me 3 years from now, there should be a lot of consistency, but you should also find some kind of improved.
Right.
So for me, it's always about learning. It's always about pushing. It's always about experimenting. It's trying new things. And it's also trying to put yourself in situations where, where perhaps you learn you're wrong about something, or that maybe you need to evolve your thinking.
Yeah, in bringing that up about creativity and inspiration and trying new things, it's struck me in my organizational life that there's very little tolerance for that from the executive team. They want a sure thing.
Yeah.
That's been one of my frustrations, that if you were to say, let's experiment,
Yeah.
at least the milieus that I was in, experiment is not a word that they even want to go there and try something, see how it works out. It's like this. We were helping our leaders become better customer service leaders, and I was in healthcare for many years. And we actually, I had a team that was, cross-functional, and we said, we're going to do an offsite, and it's going to be a fun day, never been done before with the leaders of this organization. We're going to do an offsite. We're going to get people work and get people to know each other, working as teams and stuff.
Sure.
And when I presented it to my boss, he was kind of like, I don't know, this is different. And then I got to share it with the senior leader team, and their one ask of me, I think most of them kind of bought in, but they wanted to see outcomes, quote unquote, of this day of just getting to know each other. They wanted to see. So for every exercise we did, I had to dream up an outcome that this slingshot shooting at shooting bean bags is going to do for us,
Right.
That's always been a frustration. It's just like creativity and doing something that is maybe just fun and making those connections between each other. That's invaluable. And by the way, the only people that didn't show up to that day, we did five or six, 3 executives only: the CEO, the HR VP, and the CFO. They chose not to come, and that spoke volumes to me.
Right. And that's where you're like, yeah, I can't. You can, that's the thing that it's so funny. I get people, I'll go out and I'll speak about things sometimes, and I'll get emails from like HR leaders that are like, hey, I'm in an organization, like I've been doing all this stuff, trying all this stuff, and I just can't get my CEO to get it. Like, they just don't get it. Like, what do I do? How can I convince them? Or, and I'm like, well, at this point, like, the best thing you can do is go find a different organization with a CEO who gets it.
Wow.
Because it's so, like, I've just found that it's so hard to convince. Like, if you have someone who's been doing the same thing and had the same beliefs and been in the same system for 40 years, the chances of you converting them over to understanding and investing in the value of relationships or people or whatever is a really, really long shot. You can try, and there's a lot of things you could probably try, and you can do sales seminars and all these different things, but the reality of it is, like, if you want to do the quality work now, find an organization that has leaders who get it, but that haven't cascaded through haven't aligned their beliefs with the rest of the organization. Like, that's the fun work. That's where you can make a big impact.
One of the first, I spent some time in the Navy, and one of the first corporate training sessions I went to, it was a day-long thing about change management. It had been in the early 90s. And I do remember the guy that gave it. One thing that I took away was incumbents usually can't get the job done. When you're doing substantial change, it's typically you have to you got to get a new team, and I've found that to be true. It's really hard to have incumbents grab on to what you're trying. It's just an uphill battle, and that you would say that to that HR person, just go find a better place, find better leaders, and then you'll have some fun. And that's great advice. It's kind of scary to hear that, but I hope she took your advice and is doing better.
I've given a lot of people that advice. I'm sure some of them have taken it, and probably others. Sometimes what I find is a lot of people, like a lot of those people, they're coming to me to ask this question, and I think half the time they just want someone to give them permission to just go, I'm not going to win this. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's okay for me to move on. Like, I don't have, like, it's not me that's broken here, right? And I think so much gets there's so much out there about, getting our executives on board, and we in HR, we stress so much about that. And it's like, going back to your point earlier about experimenting and all of that, is like, you got to do one of two things. You either have to realize if you aren't going to move forward unless you can convince your executives to sort of give you permission to do that,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not on board, then you need to go find somebody that is. Or if you're going to stay and they're not on board, then you just go do your experiments and don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you can prove to them that whatever you want to do has impact to the bottom line, they might start coming around after time.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, you're at risk of, like, you're going to have to put your sense of personal safety at risk in terms of your job security. You either got to just go do it and show them that it works, knowing that that might not end up working out for you, or go find some place where you can do better work and they'll value it.
Mm-hmm. Great. Hey, let me ask you this. When you're doing engagement surveys and such, what are, and I'm not even going to ask for best practices as follow-up to the data, because we know about those.
Right.
Do you have a particular Jason way of doing the follow-up to when you have the data from an employee engagement survey?
I think for me, the key to a good survey or an effective survey, everything happens up front. Like, before you ever send a survey out and collect any bit of data, like, a good survey is decided before you ever do any of that. So you're really thought through, like, what are we measuring and why are we measuring it and why does it matter and what impact do we want to come out of this? And in order to achieve that impact, what kinds of things are we going to need to do on the back end? And then how do we prepare our leaders for what their role in this is? How do we prepare our managers so that when it comes, everybody knows what they're like, okay, it's time. Remember how we've been reminding you about this, it's time. And it's zeroed in on things that we understand are important and why they're important, so then we can really get in, roll up our sleeves and go to work. And so as far as, like, best practices, or not even best practices, but just effective practices around employee surveys, I think it's been said. Everybody, you're opening a feedback loop is the best way I can describe it. Anytime you do a survey, you're opening a feedback loop, and you always have to close the feedback loop. So it's like, I asked for your opinion. Mm-hmm. You shared your opinion. I need to consider and hear that. I need to circle back with you to talk about that. We need to take some action, whatever that is. It might just be to acknowledge that we heard it and share that we really can't do anything about it, or it could be, here's how we're going to move forward, and then closed. And every time, because open feedback loops break trust and all of that. So, I mean, the key is, no matter what you do, is just making sure you're closing all of your feedback loops.
Beautiful. When you say work doesn't have to suck, I totally agree with you. I've, like, probably in the last month, I now have a mantra, and it may seem like really crazy, but other people say it too, but it's really like, I want my work to be the kind of thing that gets organizations to the point where their people love to come to work.
Sure.
People love their jobs, and you're really saying the same thing. Work is broken. It's inhumane, pretty much.
Yeah.
And so, tell me a couple of things that you think organizations might need to rethink from the old way to what's really needed and necessary in 2019, heading up to 2020.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, so I'll give you just because I spent all of last year, or much of, I guess, last year working on my book and thinking about some of these questions. So, like, some of this is, I'm stuck inside of that frame right now. But what I would say is that I think I really think that this shift in language that we've had over the last couple of years to starting to talk about the experience of work at an employee level is really important. And I think that's really what's been missing. Like engagement, we've been measuring engagement for 20 years, and engagement, or 30 years now. Engagement is a measure of the effectiveness of the employee experience at your organization. It's basically, that's what it is. But we just recently now we're finally saying, well, let's go back and actually think about how could we design that differently in a way that would work, and that works better for the employee. So instead of just reactively trying to, like, well, we're measuring, there's a couple things that are really broken, let's go back and try to put a Band-Aid on that, or put our finger in the hole in the dam and see if that helps. We're going back and actually thinking about it as designing that experience from a position of understanding core human needs when it comes to creating work with other humans.
Right. I'm going to share with you after today, I'm going to share with you a webinar that I saw just a few weeks ago, and it was just, to me, it was top of the line. These guys, these experts, high-level executives at DecisionWise. Do you know that company?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just awesome because they talked for an hour about designing an effective onboarding program. And that's kind of what you're saying. Each aspect of an employee's experience needs to be designed with them in mind.
Yes.
And that, there you go. It's recruiting new employees. It's onboarding them. It's how we develop them on the job. That's a process in itself. So I get the difference now. It's taken me a while to kind of go, what is this experience thing? But yeah, if the experience is mapped out and kind of a ruts in the road, I mean, and you're doing this for everybody, it's just the way you do things, the engagement's going to be there. So you have to work on the experience of your different aspects of work that they experience. So I appreciate you saying that. It's really something, and they are two distinct things.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna send you the link to that webinar.
That would be awesome.
It was really good. You'll
Cool.
see how smart these guys are.
Yeah. No, they do. Yeah. That's the interesting thing is that there are. And again, kind of what I said earlier, like I feel like right now is an exciting time to be in this work, because there's still an enormous amount of work to be done. We're nowhere near having this work done, but there's a lot of smart people starting. I think we're at the front end of starting to actually do things that will really move the needle.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just applying design to the experience that employees have of work, that in and of itself is fundamentally a shift for us. And it's so interesting because it starts with the question, like, how do we want people to feel?
Yes.
And why? And then and that's born out of design starts with a deep understanding of people and of your people. And it's also interesting because what will happen is, like, if you think about, I think about different, like, customer experiences, there's different customer experiences, and like some people love the, like, high touch, you walk in and somebody, like you go to a retail store and somebody's right there and it's like, what are you in here? How can I help you? And they're like right there. Other people are like, why are you talking to me? I just want to, like, wander around, and if I need something, I'll come find you. And then, and there's this, and so there's people that have a different range, and the organizations, like I think about Apple and some of these others, they know who their customer is, or at least they have a pretty clear picture, and they've designed an experience around what that customer has come to expect. And I think part of the reason they know who their customer is because they designed an experience that attracted those people. But it all starts there. It starts with the customer and understanding what the customer cares about and what their needs are and all of that. And I just think we have not done nearly like, it's amazing to me that we haven't. We just haven't spent enough time on that from an employee level. Like, who are our people and what do they care about? And what do they need?
When you talked about how the different customers are, Someone wants somebody right at their side and showing them around, curating, but that tells me that there has got to be in each of us a sensitivity, and maybe particularly of leaders, a sensitivity to know, I get it that they don't want me here right now. I get it, so I'm going to move away. It's that emotional intelligence thing. It's being able to read the room, if you will, or read that person and do what go in the direction that they want you to go. With them or not. So that's a leader. A leader has to do that with his or her people too.
I think that's right, and I think I think well design. If we're doing it, if we really get into design. Design is really about sort of controlling what we can control, right? Designing what we can control. But then there's also this element of understanding that each individual, and I think this is the challenge, and this is where, how we accommodate for this in systems and leadership and all of that, is understanding the individual nuances for people. Each employee is going to need something a little bit different, and part of the work of management is really understanding what that is and how that's where the magic of the manager comes, is that the manager can fill in the gaps, right, where the overall system and environment maybe can't deliver all parts of that experience, but the manager then can customize the pieces that each individual employee needs or what's different, and equipping them to do that is really important, and I don't think we do that very well.
I tell this story when I'm training leaders, and what you're talking about, nuance. When I'm training leaders, I talk about a manager of a neighborhood clinic, we used to call them. So there were 6 or 7 doctors, maybe 25 employees, and lots of patients in our neighborhood coming in. And the manager at the clinic, it was really performing poorly. And she would come to me, and I was the employee relations director. And she'd come to me and she says, Jane Doe needs to be fired. Okay, tell me what you've done. Well, she's been late. Our policy says when they're tardy so many times, you got to do this. And I've taken her through the steps, and I said, well, let's look at the facts here. And she basically was going to fire that person for a total of 10 minutes of tardiness. You see?
Yeah.
And she could, right? She could. By the book, she could, but she had no sense of nuance. She probably didn't want that person around, but she had
some other reason.
No sense of nuance that this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it's total over 6 months. It's just awful. So she's no longer a manager, but that happens.
Yeah. Sadly, too many of those stories out there. Too many.
I know. So tell me about when you go into a place and and we're getting close to the end. I'm
sure.
Respect your time. When you're getting close to serving a company that you get to exercise your gifts at, and I love when you said that. My gift is this. I think that's beautiful that you're like walking through the world with a gift, and you're going to give that gift to organizations and other people. That's the way I kind of like to see it for myself too. But
awesome.
You're starting a leadership development or management development program. What would be the first thing that you would want to cover in like the first couple of hours of a manager development? Maybe they've never been trained in their life. Because that happens.
Yeah. Well, my favorite thing to do with a group of managers or leaders is an exercise that I don't know, I started using it a number of years ago, and I just have found it to be profoundly effective. It's basically an exercise where I ask them to or invite them. I say, you get to, for a moment, for the first chunk of this our time, I want you to take your leader hat off or your manager hat off for a moment, and I want you to we're gonna spend some time remembering what it's like to be an employee. And then I have them go to two, it basically is a 2-part kind of exercise. The first part is, I said, I invite them to think back in there throughout their entire career to the time when they were most in love with their job. Like just like everything was clicking and working, blah, blah, blah. And I have them, I'm like, I want you to go back and think, like, remember what that was like. I'm like, hopefully it's not that long ago, right? But
yes.
I'm like, hopefully it's fairly recent, so you don't have to think back too far. But I'm like, I want you to think about that moment in time. And then I ask them some questions. I ask them, you know, when you were in that spot, how do you remember feeling about work? Like, what were the emotions that you remember, kind of like, as you think about it, what emotions come up for you? How do you remember feeling about work? How do you remember feeling at work? I ask them to describe like how they would qualify the quality of their work during that time compared to the rest of their working career, and probably compared to the people around them. And then the last thing I asked them to talk about is how was work spilling over into your life outside of work? Like, what impact was it having on relationships, or just in general how you were outside of work? So I have them do some reflection on that. Then I'm like, okay, hard stop. We're going to break, and now we're going to talk about a different time. And then I have them think about that time when, like, the worst job you ever had, when you were most out of love with your work. And everybody's got that one. Like, that one's easy. They can think of a half a dozen, you know what I mean? And sadly, that's a more common experience. And so then I ask them the same 3 questions. And then I have them kind of break down and sort of compare notes and, you know, be like amateur analysts, and like, what are the common things that bubble up, and what are the, you know, like, just to talk through, because what inevitably happens, it's the same things that come up every time. And what it does is it sort of starkly, based on their own experience, you like, this is it. And like, you've had this experience, and you've told me that those had profoundly different impacts on you, the quality of your work, and who you are as a person outside of work. Like, it's a big gap. And I'm like, the question is, what kind of experience are you creating for your people? Like, this is what this is about. Because it's easy. If you create an experience where people can love to come to work, they're going to feel better, they're going to do better work, and they're going to be better human beings for their family and neighbors and communities. And the alternative. So like, this is really the decision. And when you can get them anchored in, like, I just try to like make it real. Like, we talk about engagement. Nobody knows what the hell engagement is, right? It's a abstract thing, but when you can get them anchored in a very real experience, that they're like, oh, okay, yeah, now that makes more sense to me. Like, what the impact, like, that's engagement versus disengagement. Like, right there, you've lived it. What are you committed to creating for your people? That's where I start them, because after that, then they're more open to like, okay, how does that work?
And they're connecting emotionally with you and each other. Yeah. You know, I do something that's way less deep when I start, but I do the good boss, bad boss thing. Like, tell the characteristics of your worst boss, characteristic of your best boss, and then practically just beg them to be on this, do this stuff.
Yeah, right.
And don't do that stuff. It's not.
You already know, like, you know.
Yeah. I love that. Hey, I think we're out of time, Jason. We have just less than a minute. What would be your word to independent consultants that are helping organizations get better? Two or three words of advice. People like you and me.
Keep going. Because it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. Keep going. Keep going and get help, right? Because and I mean get help not in the sense of like, go get your head checked,
right?
Although that sometimes feels appropriate, but find people who can help you improve your business, because it's really hard to see your own business clearly.
Awesome. Jason, you were terrific. I just enjoyed our talk. Here's the bell. You hear it?
We did it. We nailed it.
We did it. Yeah.
Good job.
So I will shut off the camera, and I want to thank you again for the time you spent with me. And I just
pleasure.
So here we go.